This is the most important time of fantasy football. We are 2 weeks out from the playoffs, and there are absolute league winners hiding right under our noses in the waiver wire that we need to go ahead and stash. Lucky for you, you found the perfect video in the entirety of YouTube itself, because I'm going to be giving you guys a list of the top players we need to be stashing on our bench that can absolutely become week winners, if not league winners, later down the line of the season. Starting out with D'Ernest Johnson, a guy that's been getting a lot of hype as of recently, and probably for good reason. Let me explain why you need to be stashing this guy. Since his bye week a couple weeks ago, he's been averaging just under 7 fantasy points a game. But if you've been around this page for long enough, you know exactly why this is. Teams usually tend to get their final depth charts and all that kind of stuff finalized after their bye week and make the plan that they want to use going forward. This is usually why we see a bunch of rookie wide receivers and running backs get a lot more usage and a big boost after these weeks, because they start to narrow down their depth chart and really pick what they want to do for the rest of the season. And D'Ernest Johnson has earned himself the RB2 role, yes, over Tank Bigsby. And if you look at his chart, he really did not have a role at all. And then after the bye week, boom, he sees a 30% snap share average and climbing. Now, is he going to take a whole bunch of work from Travis Etienne and make him a bad running back and split this backfield 50-50? No, probably not. But what it does look like is that he's going to continue to see around 30% of the snaps and get a couple carries on the ground and a couple targets out of the backfield and be somewhat used. The Jaguars have been looking to split this backfield not 50-50, but just a little bit, like a 70-30 in general with Travis Etienne since last season. He'll likely fill in for a couple red zone roles, maybe a couple third downs, nothing too crazy. But this is the time in fantasy football where we need to be dropping those third or fourth string wide receivers that don't necessarily have a whole bunch of upside for guys like D'Ernest Johnson and running backs that can have a whole bunch of upside, and they're one injury away from that. There was a bit of an injury scare with Travis Etienne this week. He's fine, he's healthy, he's going to be playing. You don't need to pick him up this second, but you can stash him on your bench, because if he were to get injured, he would be a league winner, and he sees a little bit of value on his own already. But I'll talk about my full running back strategy later in this video, so make sure to stick around for that. But if you guys did enjoy so far, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It would help me out a ton, but your fantasy teams will thank you, because you found where all the information is on YouTube. I would love to have you guys coming back every day for these videos. But if you guys are looking for a wide receiver stash, please go ahead and get A.T. Perry right now. He's as good as it gets for a stash, and you can play him in your lineups this week. This is a wide receiver that's kind of similar to Quentin Johnston, not because of the talent, because of the situation. Michael Thomas is on IR, and he can't be activated off that until week 16, but if we know anything about Michael Thomas, these injuries tend to linger a little bit. He probably won't be ready to go for the rest of the fantasy season. And on top of that, now we have Rashid Shaheed dealing with a quad injury that could be somewhat serious. He'll definitely miss this week, if not more than that. So he's not just a long-term ad. He could quite literally be thrown into your starting lineup this week if you really need it. And did I forget to mention that Chris Olave is dealing with a concussion? Will he play this week? Probably, but if there's a chance that he doesn't, A.T. Perry's literally going to be the wide receiver 1. But outside of all those new injuries, when Michael Thomas did get injured in week 10, he came in and played every single wide receiver snap. He matched Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed in routes run and snap percentage on the field. He actually led them in those two things. In week 10 and 11, he ran 89 and 80% of the routes. Again, more than everybody else. Is he a guy that's super ultra talented and needs to be in our lineups as the next Justin Jefferson? No, but the situation is just too good. There's so much room for upside, and if he can make a case for himself while all of these other wide receivers are out, he could really be a top sticking point for Derek Carr when he's the wide receiver 3 with no Michael Thomas. And it always does help that he's the tallest wide receiver on the team at 6'5". He's going to get some plays drawn up for him in third and short, or maybe even red zone looks. That's just how the NFL works. I think he's one of the best stash players on your bench. Go ahead and get him right now before anybody else does. But keeping it on the wide receivers, probably my first or second favorite stash for this position is Josh Palmer. This is a guy that's everybody's been dropping because he's been on IR and nobody really wants to roster him anymore. The same thing that happened with Pat Freiermuth. He's a really good tight end. We know that he is. We know that he's used in the offense, but everybody dropped him because he's been on IR for a while. Go get Josh Palmer. Let me explain why. There's always a chance that his injury could linger a little bit longer than the IR stint expects. He's expected to come back in week 14. I think he will, if not week 15. But he's probably the one guy on this list that will have the biggest impact the second he touches the field. That's because there's quite literally no wide receiver 2 on this team outside of Keenan Allen. You got Quentin Johnston, who can't catch a pass. Despite 2 out of the 3 wide receivers getting injured that he needed to beat out in the depth chart, he still can't produce. Mike Williams is on IR. Josh Palmer is now on IR. Jalen Guyton isn't playing that much. There's a whole bunch of inconsistency at this wide receiver 2 spot, and Josh Palmer has been and will continue to be that go-to guy. Teams are starting to double team Keenan Allen because they're realizing they don't need to put that much emphasis on these other wide receivers. Quentin Johnston had 1 catch. Jalen Guyton had 1 catch. Erickson had 1 catch. All of these guys just are not producing despite Keenan Allen being the one double team. And again, lucky for us, Josh Palmer has shown week in and week out that he can be that relied upon guy. In his last 4 healthy games, he saw 7 targets in every single one of them. He's atop all of the wide receivers in routes run and snap percentage, all of that stuff when he is healthy. Herbert does trust him already, and that's a plus. So there's really not much more I can say about him besides he's going to have a 10-point fantasy floor when he comes back, and he has the upside in this offense that is top 10 in passing. And you have Justin Herbert, another Another wide receiver that can be viable as a stash as soon as this week off the waiver wire is Jaden Reed. And I'll be honest, this is not a guy or offense I was too excited about in the beginning of the year. I was under the narrative that this offense wasn't going to be great. Jordan Love isn't going to elevate it. There's not really much room for upside when you have Luke Musgrave, when you have Aaron Jones, when you have Christian Watson being those top 3 guys. Where are the other targets going? A lot has changed since the beginning of the season. They used to be bottom 5 in every single passing stat imaginable to a team that's 10th in passing attempts. Now their numbers aren't necessarily amazing. They're still about average. But that is still way better than expected and a plus for these wide receivers. And you also have Aaron Jones and Christian Watson missing a significant amount of time, which has allowed guys like Jaden Reed to be a sticking point in this offense and have a little bit more of a role than they would have if everybody was healthy in the beginning. He's been increasing his snaps and his usage, which is a profile that we want in these wide receivers to be stashing them. Over the sample size of the season, he's been a decent wide receiver. He just had 8 targets last week. He's had a couple touchdowns in the past few weeks, and they find some ways to get him used on the ground. So it's not like these targets in these big boom games are really out of nowhere. He had 15 or more fantasy points in his last 3 and 11 or more in his last 5 out of 6. And a lot of this has been coming from how good Jordan Love has been playing recently. The passing volume is up. The offense is looking decent. He's been averaging 2 passing touchdowns this entire month. The only drawback that I do have here with Jaden Reed is that this offense is really spread out. One of the most in the NFL. You got guys that are all the way at the bottom of the depth chart getting 2 or 3 targets a game, only at 20% snaps. So when you have guys at the bottom of the depth chart sometimes getting similar, if not the same usage as guys at the top, having a spread out offense like this where you don't really have that true number 1 option that we can predict every week is not something that's necessarily great. But at the same time, when you're stashing a wide receiver off the waivers, there's really going to be a lot of red flags anyway, so you might as well look for straight upside, and Reed has that most definitely. They also get some great matchups coming up against the Giants, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and the Panthers. Outside of the next week coming up against the Chiefs, they have a pretty much cakewalk for these wide receivers. But if you're looking for running backs, I know you guys love this part of the video. Rico Dowdle is a guy that we can be stashing, and let me explain why he's a good ad. It's not because he's a guy that we can plug and play, put him in our lineups, and start him instantly. It's more because this is the time in fantasy football where we need to be rostering those high upside running backs that are 1 injury away from being league winners. Now that pretty much all the bye weeks are out of the way and we've learned throughout the entirety of the season who players are and who's necessarily better than others, we can go ahead and drop those wide receivers that are 4th string guys that might be putting up more fantasy points on the weekly basis but don't have as much upside as these 2nd string running backs that literally are an injury away from winning leagues. By doing this when it gets down to the end of the season, you really maximize your value per roster spot, and that is exactly what Rico Dowdle is. Does he see a whole bunch of field timer usage? No, but he has upside and he's shown those flashes. And snaps have actually been decreasing over the past few weeks. Tony Pollard has been coming into his own and Rico Dowdle has been taking a little bit of a hit because of it, but that's not anything to worry about because his rush attempt per snap percentage hasn't changed at all. The percentage is still the same. He's averaging 4.5 yards per touch. He looks like a mini Tony Pollard from last year. Again, it's going to be better to stash him on your bench instead of those 4th or 5th string wide receivers. But speaking of stashing a great running back, go get Zack Moss, please. This is the last time you're going to be able to do it. We've all been dropping him over the past few weeks because Jonathan Taylor has became the workhorse RB1 again, like we all expected him to, but now he has an unexpected thumb injury that will keep him out 2 to 3 weeks. And this is a pretty big one because there's no running back in the backfield anymore. That is Zack Moss. And if we've learned anything from this season and last, he is great when Jonathan Taylor is not playing. Use him as your number 1 priority to stash him as soon as this week. He can be a starter for you. If he's still on your waivers, please do me a favor, go get him. This season when Jonathan Taylor has been out, he's averaging 20 touches a game and a clear workhorse RB1 used in the receiving game and the rushing game. 3rd downs, 2-minute drills, goal line, everything is his. If you need a playoff push, go get him. Don't think twice about it. Even if you don't, please be the one to get him on your roster for the time that JT's out. But in less urgent news, go ahead and keep an eye on Michael Carter as a guy to stash as well. He's a running back that came to the Cardinals at the trade deadline and just saw a season high of 38% of the snaps this week. Now, is most of this snap share because of the blowout that the Rams put on the Cardinals? Yeah, it is. But he is an amazing receiving back, and that's what the Jets have used him for over the past few years. He got 4 targets for 4 receptions last week. He's not going to be an immediate value next to James Conner, but again, he's making that case for the RB2 over Amari DeMarcado, and if he has that receiving upside and that dynamic play, he could be a guy that we can go through and stash on our bench because these backup running backs can be valuable as handcuffs. And when you're looking at guys to handcuff on the end of your roster, you don't want to be looking for guys that are in committee backfields because if one of their top RBs were to get injured, they wouldn't pass down that workhorse role to the next guy. It would be a committee again. So this is the time in fantasy where we want to be stashing these high upside handcuff running backs, the Josh Kellys, the Kenneth Gainwells, the Jalen Warrens, the Tyler Algiers of the world. Again, when you get down the line of the season, the value per roster spot is just so much higher because you don't need to be rostering those mid wide receivers that'll get you like 6-7 points. They won't win you a league, and you probably won't need to fill them in when there's no bye weeks and hopefully no injuries. But instead of just giving you guys 2 or 3 defenses at the end of this video that are great to be stashed, I'm going to change it up a bit and give you my top 10 defenses defenses for the rest of the season. So that way, depending on your league size and the way you play defenses, anybody can benefit from this. And a lot of the top 10 is still on your waiver wire. So let's go ahead and get it started. The number 1 defense for the remainder of the playoffs is going to be the Jets, and this shouldn't really be that hard to understand. They get Miami, Washington, and Cleveland as their last 15, 16, and 17 matchups. And number 2 is going to be the Cleveland Browns. If you guys are wondering what these statistics are based off of, it's pressure rate, matchup level, home or away games, weather, overall rank, and consistency rating. All of that kind of stuff, I comprise it into a list for you guys. So the Browns are at number 2. Their defense is already great, and they get the Bears, Texans, and Jets in the fantasy playoffs. The third best fantasy defense is the Chiefs, then the 49ers at 4. Again, a great defense on their own, but they get really, really good matchups. Ravens at 5, Bengals at 6, Cowboys at 7, then the Colts at 8, who have 2 of the best week 16 and 17 matchups against the Falcons and the Raiders. Then you have the Steelers at 9 and the Buccaneers at 10. So if any of those guys are available on your waivers, make sure they are one of your top priorities to stash on your bench because they get great fantasy playoff schedules. And if you guys want like a full detailed list of my top 10 and bottom 10 fantasy defenses for the rest of the season, just let me know in the comments. If enough people want to see it, I'll make the full video on it. I can break down the pressure rates and the matchup consistency and all that kind of stuff. So if you want to see it, just let me know. I'll make a full video on it. But that is going to end off this video of the players we need to be stashing on our bench. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, make sure to be subscribed so you don't miss that defense video and every other video coming out every day.